Okay, so we are back for another short video with the imperfect tense, the second tense in the past tense in Spanish. And if you checked out my previous video, we filled in this tab right here, the third from the bottom tab on the imperfecto or the imperfect with regular verbs, verbos regulares, and these were our endings for our regular AR, ER, and IR verbs. So now, in the next tab, the second to last tab, we're going to call this one imperfecto, or imperfect, but in Spanish, imperfecto. And this tab is going to be for verbos irregulares. So, irregular verbs, irregulares. So in this tab, go ahead and title it like I did right here, imperfecto, verbos irregulares. Irregulares. Okay, so once you've gotten to that tab, we're going to add to it. Here's our new page. So, imperfecto, verbos irregulares. Guess what? In the imperfect, there are only 3 irregular verbs, and those 3 are, of course, ir, which means to go, ser, which means to be, and ver, which means to see. These tend to be our irregular problem children, right, in Spanish. Ir and ser are always irregular. So these are your 3 regular verbs in the imperfect tense. Ir, ser, and ver. Now what I'm going to give you in this booklet is not the new ending. It's not the new ending for these verbs. It's just the verb, how you're going to conjugate it in the imperfect tense. Okay? So these aren't endings. This is just how we conjugate this verb. You just have got to memorize the forms of these verbs in the imperfect tense. Okay? So, for example, ir is a little funny because it kind of is an IR verb, but it mixes a little bit of the IR verb ending and the AR verb ending from the imperfect tense to come up with a weird mix that is iba. Yo iba. IBA. That means I used to go. Yo iba. And the tú form is ibas. IBAS. And guess what the third person singular is? Did you say the same as the yo form? You're right. It is. Iba. So we have yo iba, tú ibas, él, ella, and usted iba. So I used to go, you used to go, he or she used to go, or you formal used to go. The we form is íbamos with an accent mark over that I. We used to go. And then, for the third person plural, ellos, ellas, and ustedes iban. They used to go, or y'all used to go. Okay, so that's it. That's how you conjugate the verb ser in the imperfect tense. Ir, the verb ir in the imperfect tense. Now let's do the verb ser, to be. Let's conjugate that. Let's look at the conjugation of ser in the imperfect tense. So the yo form is era. Yo era, which means I used to be. Tú eras. You used to be, or you were. Él, ella, en usted era. He or she, or you formal used to be, or he or she was, or you formal were. Nosotros éramos. And then accent mark over that E. Éramos. We used to be. In the third person plural, ellos, ellas, and ustedes eran. They used to be or y'all used to be. Alright, ver means to see. And ver actually works just like an ER verb in the imperfect tense. The only problem is don't take off your ER ending. Just take off the R. We still need that E there. So instead of like a normal verb where you would take off the ER ending and put the new ending on, with ver, just take off the R. That's all you have to take off, okay? So we're gonna leave our E, VE, and then we're gonna put our ia at the end of it. So, yo veía, I used to see. Or tú veías, you used to see. Guess what? Third person singular? Same as the yo form. Ellas, ellas, and ustedes veía. He or she used to see, you form will used to see. Now, I can't go across because I'm out of room, so I'm just going to keep going down my paper. So for the nosotros form, it's going to be veíamos. We used to see. And then for the third person plural, ellas, ellas, and ustedes, veían. Veían. They used to see or y'all used to see. And that's it. That's it. That's all the irregularities in the imperfect tense. There are no spelling changes. There are no stem changing in the imperfect tense. There are no weird groups. Nothing. That's it. This is the easiest tense ever. You're either going to have, everything's going to be regular, AR, ER, or IR verbs. They're going to be treated like regular verbs and just put these endings on it. Or you'll have to deal with just these three regular verbs, ir, ser, and ver. And that's it. Nothing else. Remember again, I reiterate, no stem changing, no other kinds of spelling changes, nothing. It's just everything's going to be treated as a regular except for these three verbs. Okay? So of course the imperfect tense is way easier. I mean, look how many pages we dedicated to the preterite tense. We dedicated, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages to the preterite tense, and we dedicated 2 to the imperfect. So the preterite tense is a lot, like I said, it's a lot more intense. It has a lot more rules, it has a lot more irregularities, a lot more spelling changes and that kind of thing. Whereas the imperfect is fairly easy, it's fairly straightforward. Everything's regular except for the 3 verbs that we put on our irregular page. So, of course you're tempted to say, well, if I'm going to speak in the past tense then, I'm only going to speak in the imperfect tense because the imperfect tense is way easier than the preterite tense. But you can't do that. Okay? In fact, the 2 past tenses in Spanish are a lot like ser and estar. You can't just use whichever one you like the best. There's rules for when you use ser, and there's rules for when you use estar. Same thing with saber and conocer, right? From chapter 5. There's rules when you use saber, and there's rules when you use conocer. You just can't use whichever one you like the best. Well, same thing with this. When you're talking about something that happened in the past, there's rules. Sometimes you have to use the preterite, and sometimes you have to use the imperfect. And the rules dictate which one do you have to use as you're talking in the past tense. So that's our last tab. Our last tab is going to be preterite versus imperfect. Okay, so put that right here on your very last tab of your book. And we're going to actually really go into detail on this last tab in Chapter 9. This is Chapter 9. But I am going to give you a little bit of stuff for the imperfect side so you can understand what is the imperfect and how does Chapter 8 want you to use and practice the imperfect. Okay? So, on this last tab, right here, this last page, go ahead and draw a line down the middle so we can have our two charts. And over here, put pretérito, or preterite. And over here, imperfecto, or the imperfect. Right? Divide them up. And we're going to use the list, the rules, of when you use the preterite and when you use the imperfect. Like I said, this list is really going to become more detailed in Chapter 9. But let's just talk a little bit about the imperfect. The imperfect is actually used for routine or habitual actions that you used to do over and over again in the past. So I write that down. Let's do this. It's called routine or habitual actions in the past. And basically in English, we refer to this as used to or would. Right? So write that down. That's one of your uses of the imperfect. The imperfect is used to describe routine or habitual actions in the past. Or, like I said, if you could translate it into English as I used to or would. In Chapter 8, they start introducing chores, things to be done around the household. And they ask you, when you were little, what chores did you used to do? That would be using the imperfect. Or sometimes I like to ask my students, what did you used to watch on TV when you were little? If I asked you that question, I would say, ¿Qué mirabas en la tele cuando eras niño o niña? ¿Qué mirabas en la tele? I'm using the verb mirar, right, which means to watch. I'm putting it in the imperfect tense for the to form because I'm asking you, what did you used to watch on the TV when you were younger? When you were a child? What did you used to watch on TV? Like I could put in my answer, Yo miraba Scooby-Doo. I used to watch Scooby-Doo. And that's literally how it translates. Because I watched Scooby-Doo over and over and over again as a kid. I watched it maybe every day after school. I can't tell you how many times I watched Scooby-Doo as a kid. I just used to watch him a lot, or I would watch him a lot. Routinely. It was the sort of routine I had as a kid, to watch Scooby-Doo. Okay? Or when we talk about chores, we could say, Yo sacaba la basura. Cuando era joven. When I was younger, I used to take out the trash, or I would take out the trash. That's something that I did over and over and over again, right? Routines. Don't know how many times we did it, a lot. Just so many it became a routine. I could tell you I used to take the garbage out when I was a kid. Or using one of our irregulars, our verb ir, Mi familia iba a Myrtle Beach de vacaciones cuando yo era joven. My family used to go to Myrtle Beach on vacation when I was younger. We used to go. It was a routine. We'd go maybe, I don't know, every summer, maybe every other summer, more than once, but I can't tell you exactly how many times we went. It was just a routine. It was a habitual action, tradition. We used to go. If you can translate it as used to do something, or we would do something, we used to go to Myrtle Beach when I was young, or we would go to Myrtle Beach when I was young on vacation, then you're going to use the imperfect tense. Okay? So lots of times when you talk about yourself in your childhood and things you used to do in your childhood, you're going to use that imperfect tense. Okay? All right. Let's add another use of the imperfect. The imperfect tense is used for ongoing actions in the past. These are actions that haven't been completed yet in the story. Like when you're telling me a story, the action's not over. So we can call this in English was or were ing. Okay, so the imperfect is used for ongoing actions in the past, like was or were ing. It's things that haven't finished yet. Like if I told you a story about what happened to me yesterday, I could say, yesterday I was taking a shower when my mom called. I hadn't finished my shower yet. I was in the middle of the shower when something else happened in the story. I can translate it as was taking a shower. So I would have to use the imperfect tense. Me duchaba. Right? The verb duchar. It's reflexive because I'm showering myself. So me, and then it's an AR verb. Put it in the imperfect tense for the yo form. Me duchaba. I was taking a shower. It's not over yet. In the story, I hadn't finished the shower yet. So, kind of think of this as a squiggly line. It's ongoing. Okay? Whereas the preterite over here, the preterite is going to be completed actions in the past. And completed actions in the past tend to be things that end in ed in English. Ed. Okay, that's a completed action. Okay, and that's my mom calling. I was taking a shower when my mom called. Called, ed. That's the completed action. So since it ends in ed, it's completed. And you kind of think of that as like a completed action. One action. Think of it as the stick. Okay? So sometimes in chapter 8, what you also have is you have an ongoing action, right? Our ongoing action, which is the imperfect tense, that is sometimes interrupted by a completed action, which is the preterite. Okay? And they work together. They normally form a sentence together. They combine to form an action that's ongoing, that's interrupted by something. Ongoing and interrupted. So for example, here's our example that I gave you in English. Me duchaba. Me duchaba. I was taking a shower. That's my ongoing action. Me duchaba cuando mi madre llamó. And the llamó, when my mother called, that's the ed. That's the completed action. That's the one that interrupted my ongoing action. So that's in the preterite tense. Okay? So Me duchaba. Mi madre me llamó. Ongoing, me duchaba. Ongoing. Llamó. Completed action that interrupted. So ongoing is imperfect. Interrupting action is preterite. Now, in chapter 8, you can see an example of this in page 268. You can see an example of it in activity 8.9. See right here in activity 8.9? In 8.9, what's happening is Christina called the house. Called, ED. ED, so it's the completed action. She's interrupting all these people in what they're doing in the house. So in the instructions, they use the verb call in the preterite tense. Llamó. But she interrupted all of these people. What were they doing? Right? What were they doing in perfect tense? What were they doing when she called and interrupted them? Okay? So that's an example of ongoing and interrupting. So for example, look at Belén. Belén, in the book, Belén hablaba por teléfono. She was talking on the phone, right? In perfect tense. Hablaba por teléfono cuando Cristina llamó. When Christina called, she was talking on the phone. That's what she was doing. Okay? So, hopefully that will help you in Chapter 8 with some of your homework and quizzes. And then remember, in Chapter 9, we will continue to fill out this last page of our booklet. Good luck!